Welcome to my guide to the Epic of Alexander, specifically using the LPDU strats that we use here on Light. I hope you can learn something and take away any tips that you didn't know. Either way, hope you enjoy.
Living Liquid will open with an immediate Fluid Swing Tank Buster on the main tank after a few autos. Liquid will then cast Cascade, a hard-hitting raid wide that should be mitigated moderately. 3 tornadoes will spawn. The open space that does not have a tornado is New North. Alongside this cast, Liquid Hand will spawn, a secondary boss that needs to be taken by the off-tank. However, Provoke should not be used here. The main tank will drag Living Liquid to the southwest, hugging the South Tornado, while the off-tank drags Liquid Hands to the opposite direction to bait Hand of Parting. This should be provoked by the main tank, in which they will use their invuln, take both Fluid Swing Busters, and bait the South Tornado Protean. As this is happening, both your caster and Fizz Ranged will bait their respective tornadoes as well. They will dodge a baited AoE Protean, and then take an unavoidable Protean wave. Once this has concluded, the off-tank may provoke for the upcoming Fluid Swing once Hand of Pain has resolved. As for the DPS players, they will be assigned 1 Jackdaw each. These spawn shortly after the baited Protean from the tornado. All 4 DPS need to grab their respective doll and damage it until its HP is at less than 25%. While DPSing, all 4 dolls will cast a pretty sizable AoE around them, which applies a short debuff. Getting hit by 2 at the same time will cause yourself and anyone within range of you to pop, die, and most likely cause a wipe. However, once the AoE has gone off, ranged players should pull their doll away from middle, but come close themselves to make sure they don't miss any mitigation or heals, as feeding the dolls does a respectable amount of damage. As for feeding the dolls, once they are at less than 25% HP, the melee players will drag their doll into either bosses to feed. Once both bosses are mid and both melees have fed their doll, a second explosion from the remaining 2 dolls will occur. Again, be sure you're not too close to both. Once that explosion has happened, the ranged may feed their dolls. Shortly after, both bosses will again cast Fluid Swing, which both tanks need to mitigate. Once the tank busters have concluded, the party will stack up on the south side of the Living Liquid, and tanks on the north side, baiting the next set of Protean waves. Immediately after, 4 unavoidable Protean waves target the nearest players. The first set will be baited by the melees. At the same time, the ranged players will be baiting 4 AoE puddles slightly south of the boss. Once baited, they will then need to take their set of Proteans. Be sure to be full health after the Proteans, as the Living Liquid will start hitting the ground with splashes. Many raid-wide AoEs that should be moderately mitigated and healed through. At the same time, both tanks will pick up a tether buster spawning from the tornadoes. These hit pretty hard, so make sure tanks get some love. A second cascade begins to cast, and it's very similar to the first. However, 6 assumable throttles will appear on any members of the party. These will need to be cleansed by both healers. Party Finder Standard will have the Pure Healer cleansed from top to bottom of the party list, and Shield Healer bottom to top. But make sure to communicate just in case of any mishaps. After the 6 throttles have been cleansed, a Hand of Pain will be casted, and the party will yet again bait more Proteans, stacking north and south of the bosses. To bait the first AoE set, ranged and healers will move to their respective tornadoes shown to bait AoEs from the tornadoes themselves and ground AoEs. Meanwhile, the melees will bait 4 Proteans from Liquid himself. Once all have been correctly baited, ranged and melees will now swap. 2 melees and the off-tank will bait Proteans from the tornadoes, and the ranged and healers will bait a second set from Living Liquid. While the off-tank is baiting their own tornado, Hand of Parting will occur. Be sure to look for the glowing palm before moving the hand back in. Once resolved, and the bosses are back together, This is usually when the phase ends, but be careful, as there is another Hand of Pain and Splashes upcoming, if you don't kill beforehand. 8 numbers will appear at the phase end, 1 on each player. This indicates the order for the upcoming Limit Cut mechanic. To start with, a pair of AoEs will appear on the arena, which are always opposite one another. The first pair will determine where the groups will split off to. The numbers 1, 2, 5, and 6 will always go towards and start west to northeast, while 3, 4, 7, and 8 will go towards and start east to southwest. 1, 3, 5, and 7 will all take forward-facing coronal cleaves from Cruise Chaser. 2, 4, 6, and 8 would all take dashes immediately after. In your groups of 4, the first pair to take the cleave and dash will be following the AoEs on this outer circle shown, while the pair not yet taking the turn will be side by side on the wall. The odd numbers should be as close to the next set of AoEs possible to give room to the evens behind them, as Cruise Chaser will be doing a dash. If they are too far back, the AoEs behind them can catch up and clip them as the snapshot is very, very early. Knockback prevention should be used on all numbers for safety, as the dash has a knockback if taken at a weird angle. Once your pair has taken the cleave and dash, be sure to swap with the other pair on your side to not get hit by the next set. Lastly, as a side note, the AoEs will drop around the arena 4 times before the next one hits the middle. This is followed up by another 4 and then a last one in the middle. As number 3 and 4, be sure to count or be careful of this, as you may end up running into the next AoE and die. The trick is to be patient. Once the final AoE hits the middle, you can meet up to heal, shield, and mitigate for the upcoming J-Kick.
Phase 2 will open with the aforementioned J-Kick. The main tank will need to provoke Brute Justice, while the off tank will provoke Cruise Chaser and drag them to the middle so you can easily cleave both bosses. The party should be gathered in a circle in their clock positions, but be sure to be as close as possible to middle as you can, because you will be baiting a pair of chakrams through the arena. On the cast of Judgment Nisi, either all 4 DPS or all 4 supports will have a colored Nisi symbol above their head. Be extra careful to not touch anyone as you play out the mechanics. Next, on the link up cast, the chakrams will snapshot into place and the singular water debuff will go on a healer and the lightning debuff will go onto a DPS, which will be resolved later. You will need to move to the edge of the arena to avoid getting hit by the chakrams, as it is an instant kill. Once the optical side cast has finished, AoEs will snapshot and the chakrams will fire across the arena. You may move back to the middle to your original clock spot. Photon will be casted, which will reduce everyone's HP to 1. Shields are necessary, as Nisi is a dot tick and with an unlucky silver tick can instantly kill. At the same time, the DPS will either pass or grab Nisi from the support that is counterclockwise of them. This will be your partner for future passes. Once passed and full HP, both healers and ranged DPS that does not have lightning will head west to soak the first water stack. Once the stack has resolved, be sure to move away from it, but be careful to not touch Nisis.
Quick post-edit note that I forgot to add as I made this. Spin Crusher is a front corner cleave from Cruise Chaser that will happen a few seconds after Photon. Once the fizz range has passed or taken Nisi to the off tank, be sure the tank faces CC outside the arena south. The tank should move out of the way of the cleave once CC starts casting to avoid getting hit.
While everyone goes west for the water stack, the person with the lightning debuff will head to the main tank on Brute Justice, standing next to them but not touching. Once the timer runs out, the lightning explosion will go off and pass the debuff to the tank. Immediately after, the fizz range will need to head to the off tank, standing next to them also. Both the fizz range and off tank will bait a ground AoE and right after place another purple looking AoE that will then place a shrapnel mine. The fizz range will keep walking towards the rest of the party for enumeration. Be sure to adjust if needed. Meanwhile, one of the tanks will be given an ice AoE around them. They will need to place this AoE next to the water tornado to freeze it for a later mechanic. Once placed, the off tank will then pop all of the mitigation and soak both mines that was just recently placed. At this time, the next Nisi pass will occur with the same partner as before. As for the fizz range, wait until both mines have been exploded before passing with your tank, as it will instantly kill you. Next will be the second water stack of the phase. The healer that didn't have lightning and the ranged was stacked for this water. Meanwhile, the healer that placed the first stack, that now has a water vulnerability debuff, will collect the lightning from the main tank. Once both lightning and water have resolved, the off tank will then place Cruise Chaser facing towards northeast for the upcoming Photon Shield. This will need to be broken by the ranged DPS and off tank, but will need to be attacked from the front. It will not take damage hitting it from the side. At the same time, the main tank will bait a flamethrower from Brute Justice. This will need to be pointed at the tornado that was just placed a few seconds ago to prevent it from exploding. The flamethrower is baited on the closest player. Be sure that the tank is in the hitbox and melees be as far out as possible. Once everything has concluded, the DPS will now need to give or take the Nisi they need, shown by this debuff. The supports will be lined up in the middle to give ease of access. Once Nisi has been passed, the final water stack will occur, which will consist of the person with the water debuff, the final ranged, and one melee, and again the healer with lightning, which will then afterwards pass it to the off tank. However, Cruise Chaser will need to be placed between the ice and the wall so you can line of sight his upcoming propeller wind. If hit by it, it will give you a confused debuff and you will murder your party in cold blood. Once lined up, the final 4 players have joined their partner, Gather will occur, and the Nisi disappear. You are now free to move. At this point, the bosses should be stacked on top of each other, and tanks and healers should get ready for a photon. This reduces both tanks to 1 HP, similar to the start of the phase. However, immediately after, Double Rocket Punch is casted, which is a shared tank buster. Be sure to mitigate and heal up properly for it. Lastly, the fizz range will need to run to the east wall to bait Super Jump. This baits on the furthest player from Brute Justice. Immediately after, he will then turn around and cast Apocalyptic Ray on the next furthest target. Be sure to stay on the wall to not get hit by it. By now the bosses should be dead, but if not, 2 Whirlwind Raid Whites will cast before the enrage cast. Before phase 3 start, you will need to perform another transition mechanic. Temporal stasis will consist of both Cruise Chaser, Brute Justice and 3 debuffs. House Arrest, a green and red tether that requires both players to be very close to each other. Restraining Order, a blue tether that requires both players to be far from each other. Aggravated Assault, a debuff that will apply a vulnerability stack that prevents you from taking another mechanic. Cruise Chaser, Brute Justice and Alexander Prime will all spawn and the mentioned debuffs will appear on players. Cruise Chaser will perform 3 corner cleaves, the same ones that happen in Limit Cut that are baited by the 3 nearest players. Brute Justice will perform 2 flamethrower cleaves that are baited on the 2 nearest players. The DPS with the blue tether will go west, and the support with the blue tether will go east. Depending on which robot spawns where, one of them will have to bait the Cruise Chaser cleave. If Brute Justice is on the west side, the DPS will stand on the wall, while the support will stand directly in the middle of the marker placed to successfully bait the cleave and vice versa. The DPS with the green and red Christmas tether will always stand on the east robot on the south side of the hitbox, while the supports stand north of the hitbox. These players need to be very close to each other, standing on the corners of the marker placed is sufficient. The 2 players with Aggravated Assault will always be on the wall on the side of Brute Justice to not get hit by the Cruise Chaser cleaves. The last 2 players that do not have any debuff will always be on the west side robot, making sure they are close enough to bait the cleaves from said robot.
Phase 3 will open up with an immediate tank buster. Depending on the tank it should be invuln, but will usually always be the main tank. However, if the main tank is a paladin, or Gunbreaker, then the off tank will need to take the Tank Buster, so be sure to communicate with your tank if needed. After the Tank Buster, the tank should provoke, and Inception Formation is casted, resulting in the boss disappearing. Alex will then spawn either north or south of the arena, with Shanoa, a cat from the Alexander lore, to spawn opposite. Alexander is near north. 4 players will be given a green tether attached to a giant orb on the outside of the arena, and the other 4 will get a sizable area around them, which will spawn a crystal after a few seconds. These need to be placed in front of the cat in a square formation, making sure they are not overlapping and not too close. If they overlap, it will result in a wipe. The 4 people with tethers will need to stretch the tether away from their orb, going northeast and northwest. Once the orbs start to travel, 1 person may move down to the red dot east and west. All 4 players should wait on the red dot until the orb has fully exploded. If they overlap, they will explode and wipe. Note, do not stand on the east and west red dots straight away, as there is a chance you will clip the crystal players with your orb. Once the crystals have been placed and orbs exploded, everyone should run north, as the true heart that spawned from the cat will travel towards Alexander, but not before hitting the crystals and stopping the heart, which do a large amount of proximity damage. Immediately after, 3 flamethrower breaths need to be baited from Brute Justice, who will either spawn east or west outside the arena. The off tank will always bait the first cleave south, the main tank will bait the second towards the opposite cardinal, and finally the rest of the party will bait the last one towards north. If you take more than 1 cleave, you will most likely die. Once all 3 baits have been taken, debuffs will appear, and the heart will travel to the edge of the arena and disappearing, granting you a buff. This buff is needed for the final phase. Wherever the heart traveled and disappeared to, this is your near north. Both tanks and the new shared sentence debuff will go east relative to the heart, and everyone else will go west, making sure the tanks are stacked with the shared sentence player and stretching the blue tether. Alexander will then spawn in the location of the true heart, fire a sacrament beam that will kill you if you get hit by it. Finally, once resolved, Bruce Chaser will spawn in the center of the arena, and Brute Justice will again be on the outside of the arena in the same spot he originally started in. Both healers and the DPS that had the blue tether will need to bait Cruise Chaser's 3 cleaves similar to the ones in Temporal stasis. The shield healer will bait the cleave north, the pure healer will take it south, and the DPS will bait it west. The rest of the party will stand on the 1 marker, while the off tank baits super jump from Brute Justice by standing on the wall opposite of him. Once everything is concluded, Alexander will respawn middle and you can DPS again. And just like the last time, there's another tank buster, which will be invulned by the tank that hasn't taken a buster yet. Shortly after, Alexander will then cast Wormhole formation and proceed to disappear again. Wormhole formation is another limit cut mechanic, but it involves a few more things that consist of a pair of chakrams, the same ones that are in phase 2, that will need to be baited directly middle, 3 pairs of wormholes that need to be soaked by 6 people, a super jump, and an apocalyptic ray from Brute Justice, handled by numbers 1 and 3, or 2 and 4, depending on where Brute spawns, cleaves and dashes from Cruise Chaser that require knockback prevention, the same ones from the limit cut transition at the end of phase 1, and a sacrament beam from Alexander during the 3 and 4 Cruise Chaser baits. I will explain every number in mechanic order to prevent this guide from being 7 hours long. Number 1 will bait cleave northwest, bait Apoc Ray if needed, soak 3rd wormhole puddle, wait until resolve. Number 2 will bait dash northeast, bait Apoc Ray if needed, soak 3rd wormhole puddle, wait until resolve. Number 3 will bait super jump if needed, bait cleave southwest, dodge sacrament, wait until resolve. Number 4 will bait super jump if needed, bait dash southeast, dodge sacrament, wait until resolve. Number 5 will soak 1st wormhole puddle, bait cleave northwest, wait until resolve. Number 6 will soak 1st wormhole puddle, bait dash northeast, wait until resolve. Number 7 will wait, soak 2nd wormhole puddle, bait cleave southwest, go middle. Number 8 will wait, soak 2nd wormhole puddle, bait dash southeast, go middle. For numbers 5, 6, 7 and 8, be sure to wait for chakrams to fire before going to the position you need to be in. Once resolved, a stack marker will be placed on a random party member and you have a couple of seconds to heal and shield before it goes off. Once the stack has resolved, 2 more enumerations will appear on 2 DPS. To resolve this, you will be looking at Alex and both tanks will be going to the left enumeration and both healers will be going to the right enumeration. The 2 DPS that have nothing to do will step out and wait unless they are needed for an adjust because of deaths. Alex will appear again and cast Mega Holy, a very hard hitting raid void that he will do twice back to back. Be sure to mitigate properly, but not too much since you'll need it for the upcoming J-Waves. Alexander will disappear and Cruise Chaser and Brute Justice will reappear again. Brute Justice entering with another J-Kick, dealing a lot of damage. Throughout this whole mechanic, Brute Justice will be casting raid voids every 3 seconds while gaining damage ups. Cruise Chaser should be killed as fast as possible, and once dead, Brute Justice should then be killed, and then finally, kill Alexander Prime to finish the phase. A tank limit break 3 is mandatory to enter the final phase.
The final phase will have you fighting Perfect Alexander, an amalgamation of the previous bosses formed as one. Mechanics and debuffs to note in this phase are as follows. Shed Sentence, a 4 or 5 man stack. Aggravated Assault, a debuff that will apply a vulnerability stack that prevents you from taking another mechanic. Defamation, a huge AoE on the player. Light Beacon, a beacon of light on a player that will attract other light members. Dark Beacon, a beacon of dark on a player that will push away other dark members. House Arrest, a green and red tether between 2 players that are required to be close to each other. Restraining Order, a blue tether between 2 players that are required to be as far as possible from each other. Stillness, a mechanic where you have to be completely still, including auto attacks and GCDs. Motion, a mechanic where you have to be moving during cast. Escaped Prohibition, Dark Party Member for short, these players will be pushed away from Dark Beacon. Contact Prohibition, Light Party Member for short, these players will be attracted to the Light Beacon. The final phase will open up with a couple of autos. Immediately after, Final Word will be casted and every party member will be given a debuff. The debuffs to note are as follows. Light Beacon, Dark Beacon, 3 Light Party members and 3 Dark Party members. As these debuffs appear, you can immediately begin to get into your position for Final Word. However, shortly after, a cast of Ordained Stillness or Ordained Motion will happen. These are self-explanatory. Stillness means you have to stand still and on-target the boss to prevent any movement, and Motion means you have to keep moving around to prevent death. Light Beacon should place themselves on the northmost wall, as Light doesn't have a distance requirement while Dark Beacon does. Dark Beacon should place themselves on the C marker south. The rest of the party, no matter your debuff, should place themselves in front of the 3 marker but not touching the Dark Beacon player. Any further away could result in the Dark Party member being pushed too far away from the Dark Beacon and causing a death. If done correctly, 6 people will be force marched towards north, all while Perfect Alex casts another ordained stillness or motion, but this time it's the opposite of the first. A few seconds after, be sure to spread out for the upcoming stack or spread. If stack happens first, spread will be after, and if spread happens first, then stack will be after. Note, there is 2 stack markers, so spread yourselves accordingly. Once finished, Alexander will face south and start casting Fate Projection Alpha. On the cast of Fate A for short, a clone of your character will spawn at your feet. This clone will show what mechanics you have in the future once the next cast of Fate Calibration A finishes. You'll need to follow your clone and look for the 3 mechanics you will need to perform later. Meanwhile, 4 clones of Perfect Alex will spawn on the north hemisphere of the arena. Near the end of cast, 3 clones will all fire Sacrament Beams. One of them, however, will not. The order in which your clone will show the mechanics are as follows: Stillness or Motion, the debuff that can include either Deformation, Aggravated Assault, Shed Sentence, or nothing at all, and then another Motion or Stillness, while the Alex clones fire Sacrament. At the end of cast, you will be positioned southwest or southeast, all while Deformation will be opposite the party, northeast or northwest. Shed Sentence and the 3 players that didn't get a debuff during the calibration will stack up on the left grey section, while the 3 Aggravated Assault will stack on the right grey section. Stillness and Motion will also occur during these safe spots, just be sure to perform either nothing or jump first depending on what mechanics showed, and then do the second one immediately after. Upcoming is a shared tank buster with a single hit tank buster after it. Ordained Capital Punishment fires 3 missiles on the main tank that the off tank will need to share. During this, Ordained Punishment will be casted, which is a single hit tank buster that applies a physical vuln debuff. After the 3rd shared hit, the off tank will provoke and move away to avoid getting hit by it. Fate Projection Beta is the final clone mechanic which will put everything you've learned to the test. On cast, another clone will spawn at your feet, and once again, you will need to pay attention to what mechanics it will show you to know what your purpose is at the end of cast. To start with, your clone will move around the arena before standing still and performing the mechanic, which will consist of either Dark Beacon, Light Beacon, House Arrest or Restraining Order, and finally, Light or Dark Prohibitions. This mechanic can look overwhelming, but there's a very easy solution that I'll explain now. Dark and Light Beacon clones will stand on the wall and will not move during the mechanic showcase. If your clone has a Dark or Light debuff above their head, but is moving around, then you are not a beacon. Only Dark players have to think about where they need to go. If your clone has 1. a Dark debuff and 2. a Blue Restraining Order tether, you will be force marched south. If your clone has 1. a Dark debuff and 2. nothing else at all, you'll be force marched west. And finally, if you have anything else, you'll be force marched north. Dark Beacon will place themselves on the 2 marker on the east side of the arena, while Light Beacon will place themselves on a small circle northwest of the arena. Directly north is too close and will kill all Light players. Finally, once all debuffs have been shown, the North Perfect Alex clone will show either 2 large green orbs or many small green orbs. 2 large orbs meaning 2 stacks, and many small orbs meaning spread. Once shown, either of the west, south, or east Alex clones will slam the ground with a donor AoE, which indicates a safe spot at the end of the mechanic. At the end of Fate Calibration Beta, the party position should look like this. Dark Long Tether will be marched south, Dark Nothing will be marched west, while everyone else is marched north. Once you are able to gain control of your character again, the group that was marched north will stack for the shared sentence mechanic, all while resolving both tethers. Meanwhile, the Dark Beacon player, Dark Nothing player, and Dark Long Tether player will all bait jumps from Alexander's from the outside of the arena. Be sure that the long Dark Tether stretches as much as they can. Once shared sentence, the tethers and jumps have all resolved, upcoming is a stack or spread that was shown during calibration. Note, if it is stacks, the Dark players will stack middle of the arena, while Light players will stack north. Make sure if you are the Dark player that is north, you adjust and go to the correct group as if you are targeted with the stack, you will stack both of the stacks together and wipe the raid. Once the stacks or spreads have resolved, you will immediately need to go to the donut save spot that was shown also. Once the donut has been performed, you're on the last stretch of the fight. Next will be another shared tank buster with another single hit after it. This time the tank with aggro will use their invuln for all the hits, but be sure for the off tank to provoke still, as the physical vuln is still present. Afterwards, the party will gather south of the boss for the upcoming trine mechanic. Alexander will perform 3 projections of large AoEs on the ground in order, starting with the first hit, then the second, and finally the third. To resolve this, you'll need to look out for only the third and the second hit. The easiest way in my opinion to remember this is as follows. When Alex shows the first AoE you see, this will show you where you need to finish at the end of your movement. Then, when Alex shows the second AoE, this will show you where you need to start. This is found by simply avoiding every single AoE of that set and the one before it. Once the movement is done, there will be stack on the party, so be sure to move as a group to prevent any deaths. These hit pretty hard, so be sure to mitigate properly. There will be one more tank buster that the tank will invuln, and finally, one more set of trines. Once the second set of trines has concluded, Perfect Alex will start casting his enrage sequence. 7 jails will descend onto the 7 circles shown on the arena, starting northeast and travelling clockwise. These all need to be taken solo in the order of healer, healer, tank, tank, range, range, melee, and finally the solo melee will not have a jail, and the last chance to kill Perfect Alex. If a jail is missed, you're wiped instantly and sent straight back to phase 1. Be sure to use Limit Break 3 if you have it, and if all goes well, the boss should hopefully die, and you've claimed your victory over Perfect Alex.